response and initiatives to support vulnerable Canadians through the COVID-19 pandemic. We will also, though, of course, take you to Nova Scotia this hour and throughout the day for some of what you might call the careful and safe tributes in this time of COVID to those who were killed in that violent rampage over the weekend. We know now of at least 20 victims. 18 of them have been confirmed, 2 more presumed to be dead by their son. And we will also bring you the latest on the investigation today. Those numbers, of course, could vary because police are still looking at some 16 crime scenes. I will tell you, that is the actual sky behind me in Ottawa right now. So a fairly grim and bleak day here in the nation's capital. But let me show you where we are waiting to hear from the Prime Minister, of course, outside of his home here at Rideau Cottage, the regular backdrop for his address. Before we get there, though, I do want to turn the story back to Nova Scotia, where so many people are still reeling from events that unfolded over the weekend. And as police, the RCMP, continue their extensive investigation there today. Larry Harrison is the member of the provincial legislature for the riding of Colchester-Musquodoboit, and he joins me now. Good to see you, Larry, and my condolences to your community and to all of Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
How are you doing? How are the people around you doing today?
I think everyone is just getting emotionally drained. This is just a horrific situation, and trying to respond to it in a variety of ways that is out of our normal. It's making it more and more difficult. I mean, our normal is to be, sure, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Larry. Your normal is, I guess, to all get together and help one another.
Well, exactly. Our normal is to walk in a house, give someone a hug, sit down, hold their hand, talk to them, ask what can be done. In a few days' time, we get together as friends and families to honor the person that died, and all that stuff is gone now. So we need to find different ways now to respond to this horrific level of grief.
Yeah, I mean, it does make it so much more difficult, the fact that everyone has to still be apart during this. How are people, the families, the people that you've spoken to, how are they dealing with it, given that they have sort of this double, pressure now of not being able to be together?
Yeah. Well, they've been doing a few things. There's our virtual memorial service set up for Friday evening. Last night, they put candles in the windows. On poles, there are broken hearts that are put up. I was just talking to my daughter a few minutes ago, and she's director of hospice in Truro, and they have counselors set up, and one of them specializes in child grief, and she is dealing now with some of the children that were a part of this, and the stories are just heartbreaking. They're just heartbreaking.
The fact that it happened over such a large territory, right? About a number of different villages were hit, and a number of different families. How much more difficult is that? The fact that it really seems to have touched so many people in the region.
Oh, it will. I mean, the number of families that are affected, and the friends, and another part of that are the people that really care and want to do something. And don't know what to do. They're all in this together, and I know we're going to find things to get through this, but for the next little bit, it is going to be a struggle, because we'll be doing things that are not normal for us. We're going to have to find different ways. This is still in a state of shock right now. It's only been 2 days, and most of us cannot get our heads and hearts around the amount of devastation that this circumstance put on us.
Did you? We know now of, I think, 18 of the victims. Larry, did you know any of them or their families?
Yes, I did. I knew one. I knew Lisa McCauley, the school teacher. Right. That killed. And again, these are people that we wish we had around for the next 50 years. She's very caring, compassionate, funny, positive in all situations, great teacher, and her raising 2 sons of her own at 10 and 12. She just, that kind of a person we really need. Mm-hmm. And to have her and a number of others taken away from us this way is really tragic, really tragic.
Larry, I do want to ask you a more serious question about some of the response, and it's really only around the emergency alert notice. And I ask you that because the RCMP decided to send out tweets instead of issuing the alert that would have gone off on everyone's phones. And there's at least one person who says that would have made a difference, they think, to one of their friends. Is that something you will want some answers to going forward as a politician, as an MLA?
Well, I'm sure that if something different could have been done, we're going to learn from that. There are going to be a number of circumstances that are going to come out of this that we don't know about yet. Maybe the response could have been different. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But where I'm going to put all my energy right now is not there, but all my energy is going to be going to those who have survived this, because they're going to need so much time and so much care. And I think that's where most of our energies as a province really need to go at this time.
Yeah, I get that. How long have you been an MLA for the region, Larry?
I've been an MLA, I'm into my 8th year now.
And have you ever had to try and comfort or lead people through anything like this?
Not like this, no. I mean, I was a clergyman for 41 years. And I've had to deal with a number of situations, but nothing on this level. This is hopefully never again.
Yes, no, I agree. And how is your previous job as a clergyman helping you now?
Well, I'm trying to put as much compassion and understanding as I possibly can into these folks. We're human beings, and we really want to number one, offer our best, and to give some care in this situation. And I'm going to do my best just to offer what I have. That's all any of us can do.
Okay,
I
Larry,
mean, even you going concerned about these interviews, that's a good thing, because they know that the outside world really cares about what's happening here.
Well, you're right. We do, and we're all thinking of all of you. And I do appreciate you making the time, Larry. I know these are difficult days, and do whatever you can to help those people, and we'll do the same. Thank you so much.
I know you will, and thank you very much.
Appreciate it. That's Larry Harrison. He's a member of Nova Scotia's legislature, and he joined us from Shorts Lake. Okay, we'll turn back to what we have come to be sort of our usual part of our day, if anything is usual these days. But it is the regular update from the Prime Minister that we do expect at this time. Some sort of normalcy and routine, I guess, is provided by that, and also by the help of my colleagues here in Ottawa, the CBC's David Cochrane and the host of Power and Politics, Vashi Kapellos. So hard to do these turns, but we will talk about what to expect from the Prime Minister today, because while yesterday was very much focused on Nova Scotia, and I imagine he'll have a little more to say on that today, potentially, he is also in the midst of course, putting together a government response to fight the pandemic, and we do expect him to talk about some places and things that might have gotten left out. And I'll start with Vashi.
Yeah, Rosie, as you mentioned yesterday, the focus was solely on Nova Scotia in the Prime Minister's response. In his remarks yesterday, just offering condolences and some more details. Today, we'll pivot back to the government's response to the spread of COVID-19, and primarily the economic response of the government on two facets. The first, charities. We have seen a number of charitable organizations come forward and say they are really finding things to be difficult right now because of their inability to fundraise. Obviously, with so many people at home and unable to work and relying on government relief at this point, they don't have a lot to give to charities. They had asked for sort of a stabilization fund in the neighborhood of $10 billion. My understanding is that what is announced today won't necessarily be that much. I'm not sure of the exact figure, but that it will be sort of a chunk of change for charities, specifically aimed at supplementing the money that they have lost due to a lack of fundraising. The second aspect, the second sort of facet of what I'm expecting from the Prime Minister has to do with that other huge government relief package for businesses around wage subsidies. So the government has promised promised and actually passed legislation with opposition parties a few weeks ago to provide a wage subsidy for businesses of any size of 75% of the first, I think it's nearly $58,000 of an employee's salary. That is in the application process is starting. It will be starting in a few weeks, is my understanding, although that's always a moving target as well. Today will be an announcement around opening up sort of a process by which employers can figure out how much they can expect to get. So sort of an online mechanism for doing so, because I think that is something that we have heard from a number of employers, a number of business owners who plan to access it. They're still very kind of vague on the details, vague on how fast that money will come. They needed it yesterday kind of thing, and how much they might be entitled to. So my understanding is there will be some information today on that as well.
Yeah, the finance minister's office actually telling me that it'll be CRA that I guess will provide some of that information around applications. And correct me if I'm mistaken, David, but I think charities can also tap into the wage subsidy program. So that might be part of the aid, but obviously there's more coming.
Yeah, they can tap into the wage subsidy, and they're actually given a benefit of they can include or exclude the government grants that they may get in terms of calculating the revenue, and in the various tweaks that they've made to the wage subsidy to make it as accessible as possible. In particular, Rosie, I think what we're going to see today with the aid for charities is we were told it would be to support vulnerable populations. The Prime Minister in particular on Sunday, I believe it was, referenced the disabled and people with disabilities and also seniors as particular segments of the population that have the vulnerabilities to which they are exposed has been laid bare by this pandemic, and sort of foreshadowing the need to help there. And the charitable sector could very well be a vehicle to provide that aid. And there's a couple of other things we're hoping to hear from the Prime Minister today. There is a growing problem in Canada's food supply sector in terms of meat plants, for example, where there are outbreaks of COVID-19 amongst the workforce. That doesn't necessarily make the food unsafe, it just makes the workplace unsafe for people, which makes it hard to process the meat and then backs up the food supply chain and creates all kinds of economic ripple effects and then supply problems coming into the grocery stores. And also, the last I checked the price of oil, it was up $7 to minus $7. So this is a massive problem for three provinces in particular, being Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And just on top of everything else that everybody is suffering with the slowdown in the economy, there's that double whammy of oil, because while we're looking at probably a U-shaped economic recovery with a long period of time at the bottom, restaurants, if they survive, can reopen, movie theaters can reopen, toy stores can reopen. We don't really know what's going to happen with the oil sector after all of this, because there's a lot of other structural problems at play there. So what is there to help provinces who rely on oil dig out from the problems caused by oil? Could be something the Prime Minister has asked about, given the total shock in the markets in the last 24 to 48 hours.
I'll get Vashi to weigh in on that too, but I will just say that the meat packing plant that you're talking about is the Cargill plant in Alberta, and there are 484 cases now linked to that plant.
And that is 1/3 of the country's capacity. Rosie, just that one plant is 1/3 of the processing capacity in the country.
So, and we've seen, and there was another example of that occurring too in the United States. So that is a real concern, as you say, for supply, and I imagine something that people are going to have to think about, because those are close working quarters. And obviously, that's a large part of the people working there that have been affected. Vashi, maybe I'll get you as we wait for the Prime Minister just to weigh in on the oil piece of this, because it is shocking to see numbers in the negatives like that, and try to understand how any industry could rebound from those numbers and the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's crazy, Rosie, that less than a week ago, we were sitting here talking about the aid package that the federal government was announcing for the sector based on numbers that already looked terrible, and that just in the last 24 hours, as David and you both point out, got a whole lot worse, specifically where that benchmark price for U.S. oil, at least the contracts for May is concerned. It looks like they're a bit better in June, but there is just so much instability. The reserves right now are so high. The storage capacity is full pretty much all over. We saw that price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia take place that really deflated prices below even what they were, thanks to a huge decrease in demand. And that agreement that was reached about supply a few weeks ago ended up basically doing nothing for oil prices. Now we see them even lower. The package that was announced last week from the federal government was around cleaning up oil wells. It was worth, about $2 billion, just over $2 billion, I think, if you include the credit as well. But they are considering, Finance Minister Bill Morneau said last week, even supplying credit in some way. I don't know the specifics yet. They have not announced them to bigger companies because basically oil companies need around a $40 price per barrel to cover their costs. We've seen a huge amount of capital projects delayed in the oil patch right now. We're seeing troubles in the United States as well. The president is talking about subsidizing the industry to some degree, saying that he won't let them fail. So it's almost as if this crisis, which seemed like last week it couldn't get any worse, is getting worse. The ask of the federal government is going to increase. They'll be expected to provide some details on what they're going to do, if they're going to do anything. But there is, the need is as acute as it gets right now. And it affects not just Alberta, not just Saskatchewan, but Newfoundland and Labrador too, albeit in a bit of a different way. But still, all three provinces are hurting. Their revenues will be hurting. And the federal government's revenues, I should say,
for sure.
are also really affected by the price of oil too.
The difference, I guess, is that they have more capacity to take on debt than we've seen, obviously, in Newfoundland, certainly. All right. Here is the Prime Minister of Canada emerging from his home to speak with us yet again about his government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's listen in live.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
I want to begin by noting Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Today, we remember the 6 million innocent Jewish men, women, and children who were systematically murdered by the Nazis. We also pay tribute to the bravery and resilience of survivors and of all of those who risked their lives to save others during the Holocaust.
First of all, I'd like to say that this is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Today, we remember the 6 million men and women who were systematically murdered by the Nazis. We are also paying tribute to the courage and resilience of the survivors and all those who risked their lives to save others during the Holocaust.
This morning, I want to again extend my most sincere condolences to the families and friends of the victims of the terrible Nova Scotia attacks. Since yesterday, I've had the chance to speak with Constable Chad Morrison, the RCMP officer who was wounded, as well as Constable Heidi Stevenson's family. On behalf of all Canadians, I thanked them for their service and their sacrifice. Yesterday, when I offered my sympathies to the RCMP officers who support me, I was amazed to see how many of them knew Heidi and had incredibly fond memories of her. They'd worked with her on the musical ride. They remembered her as an extraordinary person. And it really goes to show just how tightly knit, not just the RCMP is as a force, but how close we are as a country.
Yesterday, I had a chance to mention to the RCMP officers with me that I wanted to extend my condolences to them, and I was very happy to hear about their stories about her. They served on the carousel with her and told me what an extraordinary person she was. And that made me realize that it's not only about the RCMP being family and connected, but all of us as Canadians being connected.
I visited the Canadian Police and Peace Officers Memorial on Parliament Hill to pay tribute to Constable Stevenson and to recognize the contributions of all law enforcement members to keep us safe. I also spoke to a number of colleagues from Nova Scotia, both past and present, and sought Senator Stan Kutcher's advice, both as a Nova Scotian and as a mental health expert. These calls reinforced what we all know about Nova Scotia, that it's a special place where people stick together and look out for each other. This week, we are all Nova Scotian. The families of the victims can count on the unwavering support not only of their neighbours, but of every single Canadian.
It's now been a number of weeks that we've been asking everyone to follow experts' advice to protect your health and the health of others. The lockdown, the social and physical distancing are an adjustment for most of us. But for some, the consequences of the pandemic are far more profound than a simple adjustment. The virus has had the effect of worsening the inequalities that already existed in our society. The most vulnerable, seniors and young homeless or people without jobs or single-parent families, they are all particularly affected by COVID-19. At the same time, the total number of people who need help to get through this difficult period has also gone up. Well before the pandemic upset our lives, charities were there for our communities. I'm thinking of PEI Rio in Park Extension that helps young people at risk, or an organization in Saint-Michel, in Papineau, as across the country. Community organizations are an essential resource for the most vulnerable, and their mission in this pandemic does not change. But they need more support in order to help a large number of people, an expanding clientele. So the government is putting in place the emergency fund for community support today. This will be an envelope of $350 million to support community organizations and nonprofit organizations. Part of the money will go directly to small independent organizations, and the rest will go through the national organization like the United Way and the Red Cross. This is money that our community leaders will be able to use to train volunteers or increase liveries at home for the seniors, or provide transportation services for people with a disability. With this fund, we are giving organizations more resources to adjust to the current realities and difficulties associated with COVID-19.
Charities and nonprofit organizations were doing crucial work to help our communities. Their mission has always been to support people in their time of need, and that hasn't changed. But COVID-19 is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on those organizations because more people need help. For example, back in March, one United Way partner in Winnipeg made and distributed 1,475 emergency kits for families, seniors, and homeless people in just 5 days. Organizations have also had to change the way they deliver services because of the rules that everyone has to follow to keep each other safe. Here in Ottawa, there are a number of organizations that are focused on serving isolated seniors. Usually, they have day programs where seniors can socialize, participate in activities, eat well, and maintain a connection to their community. That's no longer possible because of COVID-19, so organizations are now delivering meals and providing support via phone. In Toronto, Tropicana Community Services is now helping vulnerable youth access their COVID-19 benefits. It takes resources to make these kinds of adjustments, resources these groups don't have because they're spread so thin, trying to help as many people as possible. So to support charities and nonprofits in their important work, our government is setting up a $350 million emergency community support fund. A portion of these funds will go directly to smaller, independent frontline organizations, and the rest will flow through national organizations like the United Way, Community Foundations Canada, and the Red Cross that can get funds to local organizations and vulnerable people quickly. This is money for things like training volunteers, increasing at-home deliveries for seniors, or driving people with disabilities to appointments. With this fund, we're giving more resources to charities and nonprofits so they can adapt to the new realities and difficulties brought on by this pandemic. Notre gouvernement
Our government has introduced a 3-point plan to protect jobs and help people who've lost their jobs, as well as support small businesses that are having cash flow problems. And today, I have other news with respect to the emergency wage subsidy that gives eligible employers up to $847 per week per employee to allow them to keep them on the payroll. We are launching a calculator on the CRA website that will allow businesses to determine exactly what the wage subsidy will cover. Companies will be able to apply starting next Monday, April 27th. Later today, the President of the Treasury Board, Jean-Yves Duclos, will provide additional details with respect to the deployment of this program.
Is also helping business owners and entrepreneurs adapt to a new reality with the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. This new measure gives qualifying employers up to $847 per employee each week so they can keep people on the payroll. Today, we're launching a new calculator on the CRA website so businesses can determine the amount they can expect to claim through the wage subsidy. Employers will be able to apply as of this Monday, April 27th. Later today, Minister Duclos will be providing more details regarding the rollout of this program. And I want to turn now to some encouraging news on the innovation front. Our Supercluster initiative brings together small, medium-sized, and large companies, academic institutions, and not-for-profit organizations to generate bold ideas and innovate. So a few weeks ago, the Digital Technology Supercluster challenged its network of over 500 firms to come up with solutions to help Canadians get through this pandemic. They received over 300 submissions, and they are now moving forward on a number of key projects. Toronto's DNA Stack is developing a new cloud-based network that allows researchers who are looking to improve our ability to diagnose and treat COVID-19 to share their findings. Another company, FoodX, is working with its partners to develop an e-grocery management system to make sure our healthcare workers, seniors, and others have access to fresh food during this crisis. Canadian innovators are among the best in the world, and it's great to see so many of them use their talents to help our communities. This is yet another example of what we can achieve when we work together as Team Canada. Cette semaine,
this week and in the coming weeks, you can count on us to continue to find other ways to help you. We will continue to do our part just like you continue to do yours. It's been almost 6 weeks that you've been at home, that you've been regularly washing your hands, and that you've been keeping a 2-meter distance from others. A month and a half is a long time. But your efforts are now bearing fruit. We're seeing early signs, but positive signs that we're moving in the right direction. And this is in large part thanks to you. So let's all continue to follow the experts' advice. And together, we will get there.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now go to the phone lines for questions. Just one question, one follow-up. Over to you, operator.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Christy Kirkup, The Globe and Mail. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. How will you help millions of Canadians who now find themselves without medical benefits during a global pandemic?
We know that the way we get through this particular crisis is by pulling together and making sure those who are most vulnerable get the support they need to stay healthy, to stay isolated, and get through this. That's key, not just to remain true to our values in protecting people, including the most vulnerable, but it's also key to being able to recover quickly once we're through this pandemic. That's why we continue to work with partners across the country to highlight gaps and challenges and things that we need to do more to help people afford cost of living that is in many cases going up because of this crisis. We will continue to work with partners to make sure we're getting that help out there. Nous reconnaissons que
We know that in the midst of this pandemic, there are many people who are suffering and who need help, and that's why we have put in place new measures that will help many, many people. But we also recognize that there are other people who need more help. And that's why we're working with our partners, with people right across the country and other levels of government to help people get through these difficult times so that we can come back very strong once this pandemic is over.
Millions of Canadians are finding themselves, though, without medical benefits because they have been laid off. And Dr. Eric Hoskins has said that Ottawa could cover the cost of the provinces and territories bringing Canadians into their formularies as an interim step to help. Is this something your government is willing to do?
We're going to continue to work with all sorts of experts and smart folks making recommendations from across the country in different ways to make sure we're doing everything we need to help Canadians through this crisis. We're always looking for more things to do, and we will continue to do the things that need to be done in order to help Canadians.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Michel Lamarche, TVA Nouvelles. À vous.
Good morning. With respect to the wage subsidy, I gather that it will be possible to apply starting Monday. But can you tell us, Mr. Trudeau, when companies that apply will actually receive money in order to pay their employees? The reality is that during this crisis, people need help almost immediately, and we need to be able to deliver that help as quickly as possible. We realized that the wage subsidy was going to take a bit of time to be delivered, and we're still working on that. As you say, people will start to be able to apply on Monday, and we do hope that we can get the money to them quickly after that. But it will take a number of days at the very least. And that's why we wanted to ensure that people would have access to credit. Businesses, small businesses, large corporations would have access to credit in order to get through these times. The money is coming. The online calculator will also allow companies to see exactly how much money they will be receiving from the government in the coming weeks. And therefore, they can make the necessary, do the necessary borrowing now.
We recognize the need for support as quickly as possible, and that's why we're working extremely hard to get help out to people. We started with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which has now helped over 8 million people across this country and made a significant difference. But we also want people to get we want other people to get the emergency wage subsidy, which means working with businesses to keep people on the payroll through this so that they can not only retain a job, but have a job to get back quickly to as soon as the economy picks up again. We have announced that on Monday people will be able to register for this online. As of today, however, they can see what the amount they are likely to be able to get through this and be confident in their ability to access credit from banks, from agencies like BDC and EDC, to be able to support people right now in this time of need. We're moving as quickly as we can. We move very quickly on the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. We hope to be able to get this help out to businesses to keep employees on their payroll as quickly as possible.
Michel?
Follow up? Mr. Trudeau, quickly, what does that mean? Will it go as quickly as the CERB for the wage subsidy? Or should we expect it to take longer, perhaps a week or 2 weeks before the money starts to circulate? Minister Duclos will have more to say about that in a couple of hours, but I can tell you that people at the Canada Revenue Agency are working very hard right now to deliver that money to businesses as quickly as possible after the registration. Now, it will take take a bit of time, but people should know that they will be getting that money and should not hesitate to access credit from banks and our other institutions like BDC and EDC.
Merci. Prochaine question. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Charlie Pinkerton, iPolitics. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Yesterday, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair said he intends to introduce stricter gun laws as soon as possible, and you said your government was on the verge of introducing an assault rifle ban before the pandemic caused Parliament to suspend. Will a gun control bill be introduced in the restricted version of Parliament that we see during the pandemic, or will it have to wait until Parliament returns to normal sittings?
Obviously, we are all reeling from the tragedy in Nova Scotia, and our focus right now is on supporting those families as quickly as possible and as well as we possibly can. On gun control legislation, we made strong commitments to move forward with that rapidly. As you mentioned, we were on the verge of bringing it in before Parliament was suspended through COVID-19, and we're now looking at the right way and the right moment to bring it forward. The tragedy in Nova Scotia simply reinforces and underlines how important it is for us to continue to move forward on strengthening gun control in this country, and we will do that at the appropriate time. Okay.
The tragedy in Nova Scotia makes it clear just how important it is to continue to move forward with gun control. We made commitments to move quickly on this, and we were on the verge of introducing new measures to restrict assault-type weapons in Canada before Parliament was suspended because of COVID-19. And now we are looking at what the right time will be to reintroduce that bill. But we will take the necessary time to ensure we do things properly.
So which of your government's promised gun control measures will it be that it introduces first? Will it be the assault rifle ban or something else, perhaps influenced by what happened over the weekend?
The legislation on the assault rifle ban was almost ready to go when the Parliament suspended. So I expect that'll be the first measures we bring forward. But of course, as we learn more about this terrible, terrible tragedy in Nova Scotia, we will keep reflecting on ways that we need to help Canadians stay safe in their communities, in their homes, and across the country.
Thank you. One more question on the phone, please, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to a question you were asked yesterday during the question period in the House about 3 planes that were to come back to Canada full of medical equipment from China, and that came back empty. Can you tell us more about that? I received more information about that. There was one plane that was supposed to be bringing in equipment for Canada. Another was bringing in equipment for a specific province that they had ordered. And there are very strict limits on how much these Chinese aircraft are allowed to stay in Canada, and there are huge delays when it comes to bringing in the equipment from the airport. Unfortunately, the planes had to take off without having received their cargo, but we continue to work tirelessly to deliver that equipment. We've received a great deal of equipment in recent days. We are expecting more equipment in the coming days, and up until now, we have been able to respond to the province's need every step of the way. Although I understand it's difficult for people to hear that when they're working in our healthcare system, but we will continue to ensure that we deliver all the necessary equipment to them.
We have I got more information on the issues around the two planes that landed empty yesterday. One was a Government of Canada charter. The other was chartered by a specific province for one of their orders. There are severe restrictions on the ground in China in terms of how long a plane can actually stay in their airports before having to leave, whether it's full or not. And at the same time, supply lines and truck shipments to the airports are difficult and interrupted by checkpoints and quarantine measures. For the most part, we've been able to navigate through those and ensure that Canada has received the equipment that it needs, but these two airplanes were forced to take off empty. We will continue to work through a very difficult situation to ensure that, as we have been, we make sure that Canadians get, Canadian provinces, Canadian institutions get the equipment that they so desperately need. We're continuing to receive millions of pieces of PPE over the past days. We expect many more over the over the next days and weeks, as well as the Canadian industrial facilities tooling up their ability to deliver PPEs. It's always a challenge to get the PPE into Canada in a time where the global market is very, very competitive for these. But we have managed so far to get the equipment that provinces have asked for, and we will continue to make sure we're prioritizing support for our frontline workers who are going into battle every day against this virus.
Follow-up? So what happened to that equipment, Mr. Trudeau? Is it still in our possession in storage somewhere, or? And what is the other province that was expecting this equipment? Well, we will continue to follow up on the orders that were placed and ensure that we receive the equipment we need. And we will continue to ensure that we have chartered planes there to pick up the equipment we require. With respect to the province, I will let the province share that information with you.
Hi, Prime Minister. Molly Thomas, CTV National News. I want to ask you a question on behalf of Nick Beaton, who lost his wife, Kristen, from the senseless violence in Nova Scotia this weekend. He just spoke with our chief anchor, Lisa LaFlamme. His wife, Kristen, died. She was a frontline worker, a dedicated nurse, and was also pregnant. And she was forced to reuse her personal protective equipment because there was not enough. So on behalf of Nick, let me ask you this question. Why aren't there enough PPEs for nurses and other healthcare workers, not only in Nova Scotia, but across the country? And where is the supply chain broken, and what are we going to do about it?
Okay. First of all, to Nick and to all the families going through heart-wrenching loss right now. Looking for answers, looking for reasons, looking for support. We are there for you, and we will be there for you. Like so many people across the country who are worried about what the next days will bring and what the challenges are facing. Our frontline workers have been worried about the continued availability of personal protection equipment. We've seen a number of provinces talk about possible shortages, a number of days away. We've managed to cover those, but we are in a situation where people are having to make choices to try and stretch out our PPE as long as possible. Different provinces are managing their stockpiles differently. The federal government is there to support provinces in their requests, and until this point up until this point and beyond this point, have been able to respond to the specific requests that provinces have made. At the same time, we have been fighting in a very competitive international environment where everyone is looking for PPE, which is why we've made significant investments in domestic capacity to make the kinds of equipment that is going to keep frontline health workers safe across the country.
First of all, I want to express my deepest condolences to Nick and all those people in Nova Scotia who have lost loved ones because of this terrible tragedy in Nova Scotia. This is something that people are having a hard time understanding, and we want you to know that we will be there for all the families suffering at this time. Now, with respect to our healthcare workers who are concerned about having the necessary protective equipment, the provinces are responsible for managing their protocols and their equipment. And as a government, we will always be there and have always been there to respond to any requests from the provinces for PPE. Now, we've heard provinces say a couple of times, well, we're 3 days away from being completely out of this piece of equipment or that piece of equipment. But every single time we avoided shortages, and provinces were able to extend the availability of their protective equipment. But we're working very hard at the national and international level in an environment that's become extremely competitive in terms of getting that PPE. Up until now, we have succeeded in filling all the necessary orders from the provinces, and we realized that we had to develop a domestic capacity to produce that equipment. And that's why I'm so pleased to be seeing all those Canadian companies that have stepped up to produce the necessary equipment, and that equipment will be available very soon.
Minister, you said there that you've been able to deliver personal protective equipment to what the provinces have needed, but isn't the supply chain broken if a pregnant nurse has to reuse masks and gloves?
These are decisions that are taken by provinces on how they extend and how they require the use of PPE. Different provinces have different burn rates in terms of use of PPE. We have worked as a federal government to ensure that when provinces have made requests of us for more personal protective equipment, we've been able to deliver what was needed. These are things that we're fighting for every single day, and we want everyone to be able to have the equipment they need.
The provinces make their own decisions with respect to their healthcare system and the use of personal protective equipment. Our responsibility as the federal government is to be there to support the provinces and be able to help meet their needs. And thus far, in most cases, we've been able to meet those needs. But of course, we must continue to do everything we can.
Global National Prime Minister, when you were talking about the gun control legislation, you brought up the tragedy in Nova Scotia. I wanted to know if you've been briefed on what kind of gun or guns were used in Nova Scotia. Do we know that they were legal? And based on that, how would your proposed gun control legislation have potentially prevented this shooting?
There is still a tremendous investigation going on by the RCMP right now. There are many, many different sites, many different questions that a lot of people have, and I'm going to trust the RCMP on releasing information as they feel it is important to.
But with regards to the gun control, why are you joining the two?
We have gun control legislation ready to move forward on. We were almost ready to move forward on it a number of weeks ago. We continue to see it as a priority. We had every intention and have every intention of continuing to move forward on it when things restore to order. It did not need or take this tragedy for us to be committed to gun control. We've long been committed to it. This is just another tragic reminder of the fact that we need to do more to keep Canadians safe.
And sorry, just as my follow-up, is on the World Health Organization, Ireland had said it's going to quadruple funding for the WHO, and Australia and the UK are calling for an independent investigation into China's handling of the crisis. All of them are Canadian allies. So is Canada going to up our contribution to the WHO, and are we going to be calling for an investigation?
We have been increasing our contribution to the WHO in order to deal with this pandemic. We fund them to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a year. At the same time, we do need to find answers to how this happened, so we understand how to ensure that it never happens again, and that is certainly something Canada is going to be part of. Okay.
We continue to contribute to the World Health Organization. This is an important institution, particularly in a pandemic. But we will have to get some answers in order to better protect ourselves as a country and as a planet, so that we're better prepared for the next potential pandemic.
We've seen outbreaks of COVID-19 at meatpacking plants in Alberta. Should Canadians be concerned about the security of their food supply chain, and what more can the government do to protect that supply chain?
We've heard from Canadian beef producers and associations that the priority will be ensuring Canadian supply before they move to exporting. Much of our beef is exported, but right now the priority will be on domestic supply. So we are not at this point anticipating shortages of beef, but prices might go up. We will, of course, be monitoring that very, very carefully. At the same time, we know that it is extremely important to do everything we can to keep Canadians safe, to keep workers in all industries across this country, essential or not, as safe as we possibly can. And I'm pleased to see measures being taken to reflect on how to keep people safe. The
reality is that a meat processing plant has prioritized deliveries to the Canadian market. There may be lower exports in that case, but we want to ensure that our supply chain for beef products is functioning. The reality is that there may be higher prices, but we will be monitoring that closely. But the important thing in all of this is to ensure that we are protecting the workers in essential and other industries, protecting them from COVID-19, and we must take the necessary measures to keep them safe.
Oil prices, is there going to be further support for the oil industry? And beyond that, will there be support for provinces that rely heavily on oil revenues and that might need help with their finances, their debt, to recover from this downturn?
Our focus from the beginning has been on helping Canadians, families, workers across this country, and we have put in place significant measures that have an impact on all industries, including the oil industry, with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the wage subsidy, which have helped thousands of workers across Alberta, across the oil sector in this country. We've moved forward on other measures as well to help out that sector specifically, and we're always open to working more on helping particular industries or particular areas that need support to get through this COVID-19 crisis. We will continue those discussions. On supporting provinces, we recognize that various provinces are facing real challenges in terms of cash crunches, in terms of liquidity, and our Department of Finance and others are engaged closely with different provinces on challenges that they're facing specifically.
Bonjour, Philippe Vincent-Fauzy de Radio-Canada.
Now, earlier in your speech, you said there were some positive signs, and I wonder what those positive signs are, in your opinion. And on the wage subsidy, can you assure us that not $1 of taxpayer money will go to companies that have money in tax havens? Well, in terms of encouraging signs, when we look at the pandemic curves and the numbers in terms of the spread of COVID-19, we can see that there has been a decline in the numbers. Now, we see the numbers going up in certain parts of the country, but there are fewer and fewer cases each day, and we hope that what this means is that the measures we've been taking are now helping, and are now helping the expected outcome. But at the same time, we need to keep those measures in place, because if we relax them too soon, we could end up in a situation where COVID-19 would ramp up again, and this is not something we want to see happen. In terms of our approach in helping businesses, we have always been focused on help for workers. We did not want to judge whether someone working for a small hardware store or for a large international hardware chain would be treated differently. We wanted to ensure that workers and families that depend on that income would have the necessary help. And that's why we moved forward with the wage subsidy, and we are also moving forward now with the emergency response benefit. I'd also like to say that we are always working hard to fight tax havens and tax avoidance. We have taken very strong measures to try and recover that money and impose serious consequences on companies that take advantage of those tax havens, and we will continue to do that.
Yeah. As I've said a couple of times, I think there is reason for cautious optimism. We're hearing that from medical officers across the province, across the country, noting that the increase in cases is getting smaller every day in many places, that we're still seeing more cases every day, but fewer than in previous days, which is a sign that our efforts are working. We are continuing to do the right things as a country that is getting this virus under control. However, we need to continue to do those things, because as soon as we loosen up, if we loosen up too quickly or if we're not careful, we could see a return spike of COVID-19 that would be problematic for citizens and for the economic recovery. So we're going to focus on making sure we're doing things very, very carefully, but it is encouraging to see that the things Canadians are doing from coast to coast to coast to help each other out, to stay safe, are working. That's why we need to continue them.
Now, just to understand with respect to tax havens, you didn't really answer my question. Can you tell Canadians today that the money that you paid in taxes will not go to companies that have accounts in tax havens? Can you assure us of that today, or can you not assure us of that today? We are helping workers right across this country. Someone who works for a company whose family depends on that job and who has lost that job needs help, needs to be able to pay for groceries or pay rent. And it is for that reason that we decided we needed to help people, whether it's a small company or a big company. We are helping workers who need that support. Now, with respect to tax evasion and tax avoidance, we will continue to fight that sort of action. And the choices made by some companies who refuse to pay their fair share of taxes. We have invested more than $1 billion in the Canada Revenue Agency so that we have more tools available to us to target those companies.
Merci tout le monde.
All right, that is the Prime Minister of Canada with his daily update on how his government is tackling the pandemic. I'm going to bring back Vashi and David, and I'm going to give you each 30 seconds because we're close to the top of the clock. Vashi, you can have the first 30.
Okay, really quickly, I'll summarize what he announced for the wage subsidy. You can apply if you're a business owner starting in 1 week, I believe, Monday, April 27th. And the other part was about $350 million for charities. What stuck out for me, 2 planes. This was a question from the Conservative leader to the Prime Minister yesterday. 2 empty planes came back from China. Big issues getting personal protective equipment out of that country.
Oh, wow. She maybe even left you 10 seconds there, David. Go ahead.
Beef supply. Beef producers have assured the government they will meet domestic need before they start doing exports. Supply should not go down, but prices may very well go up.
Okay, thank you both very much. So succinct. I should make you do that all the time. Vashi Capellas and David Cochrane. And I will leave you with this. So the $350 million that Vashi talked about there does not include the option for charities to use the wage subsidy. So while their ask had been substantive at $10 billion, they get the $350 million to help them, and they can also start using the wage subsidy, which we will get more details about at noon Eastern at the next federal briefing coming up. And we will also, of course, bring you up to date on any new information information we have about the shooting rampage in Nova Scotia, which has killed as many as 20 people now. We are not necessarily expecting to get a briefing from the local RCMP today, but we will get some details probably by a press release in terms of how their investigation over those 16 different crime scenes is going. And we will talk about that at the top of the clock as well, and bring you all the details in terms of the stories that we are learning about the people that were killed over the course of the weekend in Nova Scotia, as that community and that whole province continues to struggle with that during the time of a pandemic. Also incredibly challenging for them on so many fronts. Okay. I think I'm going to wrap it up. We will hear shortly from our federal cabinet ministers, who are going to give us a short briefing, of course, on more about the wage subsidy, which opens up on Monday, and a public health update from one of our federal public health officials will also be there to give us a sense of how we are doing in fighting the pandemic. As you heard from the Prime Minister, some encouraging signs, but we still have to keep doing what we're doing. The sky's looking better in Ottawa. Be back on CBC News Network right after this. Hello, I'm Rosemary Barton. Welcome back to CBC News Network, or if you're streaming around the world, to CBC.ca, and our news app as well is where you can find us at this hour as we stand by and wait for our federal cabinet update on the government's dealing with pandemic, on the government's dealing of the pandemic, as well as public health officials. We have just heard from the Prime Minister that Ottawa is providing some financial aid for vulnerable Canadians during the pandemic, and he's doing that through funding to charities. $350 million will be available to charities going forward, as well as the fact that those same charities can tap into the wage subsidy, which we are expecting more details about in the briefing starting in just a few moments. The Prime Minister, though, did start his daily briefing by paying tribute to the victims of the deadly shootings in Eastern Canada. We will show you how they're being remembered in virtual vigils and songs on social media, and we'll take you to Nova Scotia this hour. In fact, let's go there now for the latest on the investigation. Brett Ruskin joins us from Portapique with what we know so far and what you're hearing. Brett, tell us more.
Oh, good afternoon, Rosemary. This is, again, Portapique. This is the entryway. You can see the police there. This is the blockade where no one can enter and go down that roadway into that community, into that neighborhood there that was the start of this mass shooting. That's where the first 911 calls came in. Police raced down this very roadway late on Saturday evening, found a home with multiple casualties inside, multiple casualties outside that home as well. So the latest I can tell you here is that a short time ago, earlier today, there was an excavator that was actually delivered here on a flatbed truck. It rolled through around the corner and into the area there. Why might investigators need an excavator? Well, there's been a series of fires in connection with this shooting. Police say that they were likely lit by the shooter, by the suspect in this case, at homes and residences. And so they said yesterday that one of the reasons why the death toll, the number of casualties and fatalities is going up, is because officers are only now getting access to a few of the numerous sites across this province, including homes that have, collapsed in those significant fires. And so they will be combing through the rubble and the remains, essentially, of these structures. And we don't know why the excavator is here officially, but you can only imagine that that would be useful if you were carefully peeling away layers and collapsed walls and things like that in a home completely devastated by fire. They did say that there's possibly, perhaps likely, additional victims in the remains of those homes. So the latest update that we have in terms of the stats for this mass shooting is that we have identified 18 victims. There are 2 more presumed victims that are still, again, just down this road here. And there's 16 different crime scenes within this vast swath of the province in this area. So just a huge investigation, certainly unprecedented in terms of provincial police and possibly across the country as well.
Okay. Brett Ruskin in Portapique again today. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. Now, as many Nova Scotians are looking for a way to reach out, to offer solidarity to their community, we know there's that virtual vigil tomorrow. There's one man that found a pretty unique way to do it. Private pilot Dimitri Neonakis took to the skies and he traced a flight path over Portapic in the shape of a heart. His unusual route was spotted by air traffic controllers. And we've reached pilot Dimitri Neonakis in Halifax today. Dimitri, good of you to make the time as I wait for my cabinet ministers and public health officials to brief us on COVID-19. Why did you decide to do this? It's such an unusual thing to do at a really difficult moment.
Hello, Rosemary. Good afternoon. And first of all, I'd like to say that my heart was with the people of all the families affected and all the people here in Nova Scotia and across the nation. I wanted to reach out to this community in my own way and give them a big hug. It was something that I felt I needed to do, and I did that in the shape of a heart. And it was something that I felt like doing that day of that terrible tragedy.
And I think you got some reaction from the air traffic controllers when you were done it as well.
Yes, I didn't think anybody would see this. Obviously, I forgot about the power of radar. But when I landed, the air traffic controller instructed me to go left and do the procedures that I had to do. And then she said something that I will never forget. She said, "That was a beautiful flight path, by the way." And I say, "You saw that?" And she said, "Yes, I did. That was beautiful." And that's when I realized that I wasn't alone in this cockpit. I had thousands of people with me paying our respects and telling this community that we love them and we care about them. And when I came home and I saw the thousands of messages from different people, I realized that this was not just an everyday flight. This wasn't only something that I did. We all did it together. And we're staying strong and we'll get through this together.
Well, I think one of the reasons that it hit home for so many people, other than it just being, extremely endearing and unusual, is also because people are looking for ways to show compassion at a time when we're not allowed to be together. And I wonder whether that even occurred to you as you were doing it, that it would maybe hit home in a different way because we are so physically distant from one another right now.
Absolutely, and that's another reason that I did it. I wanted to be there with this community. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to help in any way I can, but unfortunately, due to the situation, to the crisis that we're going through, I couldn't. So the air was my only avenue to do this, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad people saw it, and I'm glad I was able to give a little bit of hope and a little bit of comfort and a light in our darkest hour.
Yep. Well, we all need a little bit of that these days, Dimitri. Thank you for doing it, and thanks for talking to us about it. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay. You have a great day.
You too. Stay healthy.
Bye-bye.
That's pilot Dimitri Neonakis in Halifax. It's good to bring in a little bit of good news when we can find it, because there's a lot right now. Okay, I'll bring in my colleagues here in Ottawa, CBC's David Cochrane and the host of Power and Politics, Vashi Kapellas. I think I actually asked you to talk too quickly at the end there, because I was left fillied until the top of the hour.
We just do what you say, Rosie.
Let's talk a little bit more about the wage subsidy, because this is such a huge measure. It's certainly the most expensive measure that we will see from the government thus far, and the urgency for it, I think, is real. So any details we can get about timeline would be important here, Vashi.
Yeah, super important. And actually, I'd point our viewers to the box at the corner of their screen, because we are anticipating the president of the Treasury Board, the Prime Minister, said in his remarks would be providing more details on the wage subsidy program and exactly how it will work. We don't have a huge amount of information on that yet. We do know, according to the Prime Minister, that the application process will open up in a week's time. That is very significant to business owners. There has been some information provided to a committee on the length of time. Your producer, Phil, helped us with that. The length of time it might take to get money into pockets, basically, of the business owners, another week. But that is something we'll be looking for more details on from Minister Duclos. I think that timeline, the issue of time for employers, is huge. A lot of them have struggled to initially even keep employees on the payroll, and I'm speaking specifically of businesses, for example, small businesses, but also those huge companies. Think about Air Canada and WestJet. They've signaled that they would take advantage of this program, but the details are obviously going to be very important. At the end of the Prime Minister's press conference, he also got a question about, well, is this going to be available, for example, to companies that use tax havens? I think, there wasn't a specific answer on that, but I think that does raise a broader discussion about who exactly will be eligible. If this follows in the patterns of other financial aid packages from the government, the scope will be very broad. The idea is not really to limit it, but to provide it or make it available to as many companies as want to keep people on the payroll as possible or who can do that. That does present later on a number, I think, of almost complications or questions that will arise about who was able to avail themselves or what kind of company was able to avail themselves of this kind of financial relief or financial aid. I don't think the government has time at this juncture, especially when everyone's saying we need this money fast, to go and look through every single tiny thing that a company has done. But I do think those kinds of questions will factor into the discussion a bit later on.
For sure. And we've certainly heard, I think, when the Prime Minister made the initial announcement, David, that he wasn't going to tolerate people taking advantage of it. So it's a little bit different than the CERB, the relief fund, which benefit, which I think is sort of just everybody that thinks they can apply should apply, and there's less concern around that. But there does seem to be some perhaps added scrutiny to the way this is going to work, the wage subsidy.
There's a couple of things there. I mean, on the tax haven idea, I mean, that may be a consideration, but the reality is the wage subsidy is a flow through to the worker. It's not money that goes into the bank account of the company and they get to keep it, whether they're a good corporate citizen or not. This is using them as a payroll department to get money directly to workers and maintain a workforce. So the tax haven thing is an interesting conversation, but it's not kind of material, because this is money in the pockets of workers rather than in the pockets of employers, so they do get a residual benefit from this. It may be slower to roll out than the CERB, because the CERB, which has been a tremendous success in terms of its delivery of money, was one size fits all. This is different, right? It's a 75% wage subsidy on up to $58,700 a year, which is equivalent to the maximum CPP pensionable amount, and then it's a sliding scale of exactly what the precise dollar amount will be. So that will take a little bit more time. The application scrutiny will largely be done after the fact. There will be a sort of a post-pandemic compliance thing, but in figuring exactly how much money to send to a company, that's going to make it a little bit rougher to deal with than they did with CERB. But Rosie, on two other issues the Prime Minister spoke about, PPE, the planes coming back, two planes came back from China, nothing on board. I'm told by a government official that all of that PPE equipment that was scheduled to go on those flights is now under lock and key in the leased warehouse in Shanghai. It was safely stored and will be making its way back to Canada. There is another flight coming in today with equipment from China. But it speaks to the chaos over there, right? That the world is trying to get masks and gloves and everything out of China and largely funneling cargo planes into one or two airports. And this is creating massive backlogs of trucks that need to get customs clearance. They have to go through checkpoints. They need to get security. There's limited landing windows, limited tarmac times for planes. And if your stuff hasn't made it through and you're on the plane, well, you're out of luck and you got to take off and figure out how to get it another time. So it's unfortunate they came back, but those supplies have not been lost. And the other thing the Prime Minister was asked about was gun legislation. When is he going to bring in gun control? Something that they campaigned on quite heavily, something they promised this session, something that has been delayed because of the change in everything. One of the restrictions is right now the agreement struck to have the House only sit one day in person and then with limited virtual sittings afterwards. The legislation can only be about the pandemic. So they can't bring it in right now while they're operating under this deal. They have to wait until at least the end of May, when there is a hope they can go back to the normal rules, or they would need consent and agreement, including from the Conservatives, who have been on the opposite side of this debate from the federal Liberals. So people looking for that to happen quickly, it just can't.
No, and he did say they were on the verge of bringing it in before this happened. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what that means. It certainly wasn't something that was on the notice paper or anything.
Bill Blair had said it was going to be done during the spring session of the legislature, going back to the cabinet retreat in Winnipeg in January, I want to say. But maybe. It was something that they had on their to-do list for this session.
I think just going back to the Chinese plane, the planes in China, because they were our planes in China, and I'll get Vashi to weigh in on this. It does speak to, though, the lack of reliability on PPE coming maybe particularly from China, but but maybe from everywhere. And the fact that you're sending over government planes to get things and they're coming back empty. And now, I mean, it's great, as you confirmed, David, that it's still there and it's in our warehouse, but now we are still waiting more days for it to get here. And we really don't have a lot of time in terms of getting that stuff to people.
Yeah, it's huge, Rosie. I mean, think about it for a second. We have planes that are going over there to pick up equipment, and because they don't fit into the time frame that the Chinese government has allowed for that plane to be at the airport, they're having to come all the way back to Canada empty. And that equipment, we heard a number of questions to the Prime Minister, and those questions also should be pointed towards each of the provinces, because a lot of this jurisdiction lies with them. But there are some very genuine questions about how many healthcare workers are having to reuse their equipment or are worried that, yes, they have the supply right now, but they may not in a few weeks' time. We've heard them anecdotally throughout the entire pandemic so far in this country. So I think it highlights the issue in Canada. It also highlights the fact that we are incredibly reliant on China and the procurement of these supplies in that country. They haven't specifically, I mean, I'm trying to think about all the interviews I've done with Anita Anand, the minister in charge of this. She has not, I have asked many times, like, how much of our stuff comes from China? And they won't put an exact percentage on it, but she often says and uses the word significant to describe it, right? So it's clear we have a heavy reliance on that country, our ability to get those supplies out of China. Things are not very easy in China right now. Certainly, they haven't been, but they really aren't right now. And I think even we've seen planes stopped from going to the United States as well. Like it's a global issue right now, and I think there's no easy fix. But the idea of these planes sort of leaving with nothing in them. And yes, you're right, it's good that we have those supplies still. We haven't lost them. It's not like they're gone, but it remains an issue that they have to come all the way back here. And just quickly, if I could touch on the gun legislation that you were both talking about, I do think there are some genuine questions of accountability for the government. I take the point that obviously given the current structure of Parliament, it's not going to be happening anytime soon. They did massive consultations on what this type of bill would look like, following especially calls from the mayors of Toronto and Montreal to bring in stricter gun control. Those consultations wrapped a full year ago. Then they promised in the campaign to bring in legislation. Then they promised on the anniversary of L'École Polytechnique that legislation was coming soon. You're right that Minister Bill Blair had signaled it was going to come, or I think David pointed out, in the spring. And we don't know how if that would have made a difference. I don't want to make any kind of assumption or speculate to that degree. But just on the specific question about that legislation, yes, it was intended to be introduced, but they've had multiple opportunities in the past prior to this outbreak to do so, and they had signaled for a long time. Many advocates for it had sort of raised the issue as well.
Yeah, I think they said after the consultations they then wanted to campaign on it to get a mandate to move forward with it, and so that's what they are going to do this spring. But you're right, there will be questions, especially as we learn more about the investigation. Okay, thank you both. I will take now our viewers to the federal briefing. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland is speaking about what happened in Nova Scotia. Let's listen in.
Enforcement agents sacrifice us and protect us. It is so difficult to process it when they are lost. All Canadians share your condolences.
At the events in Nova Scotia over the weekend. This would be a tragedy at any time. But for this to happen now, as Nova Scotians are all making great personal sacrifices to preserve life, is a particular horror and a particular sorrow. To the people of Nova Scotia, all Canadians are with you in your grief. So today, we will hear from Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, the Deputy Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Howard New, the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, Ahmed Hussein, et le Président du Conseil.
We will also hear from the President of the Treasury Board, Jean-Yves Duclos.
Hello, everyone, and bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone.
I will start, as usual, with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 37,374 confirmed cases, including 1,728 deaths. We have tested over 565,000 people to date, with around 6.5% of those testing positive. Though we are still a ways off and the path remains uncertain, I know that recovery and what's next is on everyone's mind right now. Canadians are patiently continuing to practice social distancing or physical distancing and staying at home. and this continues to be vitally important. Public health authorities are closely monitoring for continued and stable slowing of the epidemic, while carefully considering approaches to ease public health restrictions when and where this may be possible. But there are some hard truths that haven't changed. The first is that this will be a marathon, and we are going to have to plan, pace ourselves, and not take any sharp turns. The second truth is that there are still a lot of unknowns and no 100% proven path before us. To get this right, there will be a need to learn as we go and to evaluate, adjust, and right the course as we take cautious steps. These next steps may sound challenging, but there are things we've learned and things we now know that will keep us safe as we carefully navigate this path forward together. We know that the epidemiology in each jurisdiction is different, so the approaches won't all be the same. We know the timing, types, and range of public health measures will need to be tailored to address the unique challenges and context of the disease in each province and territory. Likewise, additional measures may need to be adopted and maintained to protect vulnerable populations and high-risk settings within jurisdictions. Most importantly, we know that Canadians have demonstrated what has worked to slow the spread of this disease and what has kept our health system from being overwhelmed. There is no doubt that our sacrifices and everyday inconveniences over the past weeks have prevented an explosive outbreak in Canada, like the ones that have overwhelmed healthcare systems in places like Italy, Spain, and New York. What all this tells us is that we can't be too confident. We can't let our guard down, and we can't afford to have any weak points in our system. What we can do is ensure we all work together, stay the course, and work to strengthen supports that meet the needs of our most vulnerable members of society. If we ensure that basic needs are met for everyone, we protect the health of all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tam. Et maintenant, je donne la parole à Dr. Howard New.
We will now hear from Dr. Howard New. Thank you. Hello. Let's begin with an update on the latest numbers of COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 37,374 confirmed cases, including 1,728 deaths. We have tested over 565,000 people to date, with 6.5% testing positive. Though we are still a ways off and the path remains uncertain, I know that recovery and what's next is on everybody's mind right now. Canadians are patiently continuing to practice physical distancing. Canadians are staying at home. These measures continue to be vitally important. Public health authorities are closely monitoring for continued and stable slowing of the epidemic, while carefully considering approaches to ease public health restrictions when and where this may be possible. But there are some hard truths that have not changed. The first, this will be a marathon. We will have to plan, pace ourselves, and avoid taking any sharp turns. The second, there are still a lot of unknowns. There is no 100% proven path ahead of us. To get this right, there will be a need to learn as we go and to evaluate, adjust, and right the course as we take cautious steps in relaxing public health control measures. These next steps may sound challenging, but there are things that we have learned and things that we now know that will keep us safe as we carefully navigate this path forward together. We know that the epidemiology in each jurisdiction is different, so the approaches won't all be the same. We know that the timing, the types, and the range of public health measures will need to be tailored to address the unique challenges and context of the disease in each province and territory. Likewise, additional measures may need to be adopted and maintained to protect vulnerable populations and to protect high-risk settings within jurisdictions. Most importantly, we know and Canadians have demonstrated what has worked to slow the spread of this disease. We know what has kept our health system from being overwhelmed. There is no doubt that our sacrifices and everyday inconveniences over the past weeks have prevented an explosive outbreak in Canada. Explosive outbreaks like the ones that overwhelmed healthcare systems in places like Italy, Spain, and New York. What does this tell us? It tells us that we cannot be too confident, that we cannot let our guard down, and that we cannot afford to have any weak points in our system. What we can do is ensure that we all work together, ensure that we stay the course, and that we work to strengthen supports that meet the needs of our most vulnerable members of society. If we ensure that basic needs are met for everyone, we protect the health of all Canadians. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. New.
Now we will hear from our Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, Ahmed Hussein. Ahmed, please.
Thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
Know that when they experience personal difficulties as a result of natural disasters, be it wildfires in British Columbia or a tornado right here in Ottawa, or something closer to home like losing a job, that every time countless charities across the country are there to help them. They're there to step up and help them in every way that they can. Canadian charities and non-profits are there to help us in our time of need. Les organismes de bienfaisance sont
Charity organizations are always there to help Canadians in times of need.
Is bringing real challenges to these really important organizations. At the very time that countless Canadians across the country are relying on these organizations, some for the very first time, Canadian charities and nonprofits are having to deal with extra costs, procuring and obtaining personal protective equipment, increased costs as a result of staffing shortages, other challenges in their communities as a result of getting materials needed to do their work. And to make matters worse, they're also experiencing a dramatic drop in the amount of donations that they usually receive. So at a time when Canadian charities and nonprofit organizations are being asked to do more by Canadians who need their services, they're seeing a drop in donations and a drop in the number of volunteers that they can rely on. And this has a direct impact on vulnerable Canadians, like older Canadians, people with disabilities, racialized Canadians, including Black Canadians, are being significantly impacted by these developments. So our message to Canada's community organizations and charities is that we will support you. At the time that more and more Canadians are calling on you to provide more services for them, we will support you so that you can meet that request, so that you can answer that call. And as the Prime Minister said, we have your back. That is why the Prime Minister announced that we are providing $350 million to support in an emergency fashion to help charities and nonprofit organizations adapt their frontline services to vulnerable Canadians during COVID-19. C'est pourquoi le Premier ministre a annoncé une aide.
That's why the Prime Minister announced up to $350 million in emergency funding for charity organizations and not-for-profit organizations. These organizations are providing help to Canadians during COVID-19.
Like the United Way Centraide Canada, the Canadian Red Cross and Community Foundations of Canada, to ensure charities and nonprofit organizations from across the country are able to provide much-needed support to vulnerable Canadians. And they will be able to do this by flowing the money quickly to everyone, including local community-based organizations that have the relationships, that know the people in their communities who need these services immediately. This money will help groups like those in Eastern Ontario that are working to provide meals to those who cannot leave their homes, who are not able to do that. It could also help organizations such as the Atlantic Compassion Fund or the Vancouver Foundation, which is providing much-needed support to women who are fleeing domestic violence. We know that these are very difficult times for Canadians, but the Government of Canada is working to ensure that those organizations that Canadians are relying on have the resources that they need so that they can continue to help Canadians now and into their future. I want to thank all the organizations, charities, and community leaders, including faith leaders, that have reached out to me and my colleagues over the last number of weeks for their hard work on this and their feedback and their guidance on how to get this right. Lastly, I want to thank the volunteers and the frontline workers, the service providers who are tirelessly working day and night to provide much-needed critical services to our most vulnerable in their homes and in their communities. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Nous sommes là pour vous.
We are here for you. Thank you.
Merci, Ahmed.
Thank you, Ahmed. And now we will hear from the President of the Treasury Board, Jean-Yves Duclos. Go ahead, Jean-Yves. Thank you, Christia. Hello, everyone.
Here today. The spread of COVID-19 has brought about unprecedented consequences and circumstances for Canadian businesses and workers. Our government is committed to helping Canadian employers support their employees during these very tough times. That is why the Prime Minister, again this morning, has reiterated and announced the introduction of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy in order to help businesses support their employees in these very difficult times. Le gouvernement est déterminé à
Our government is committed to helping Canadian businesses and their employees during these difficult times. That's why this morning the Prime Minister announced new information about the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which will help employers pay their employees' salaries during the COVID-19 crisis.
It's designed to help employers keep and rehire workers amidst the challenges posed by the COVID-19 epidemic. Having the ability to retain staff and rehire people will put employers in the best possible position to resume normal circumstances once circumstances do allow it. The health and wellness of Canadians is also that much better when people have the ability to pay their bills, their rent, and buy food for their families. It is the government's intent to keep as many Canadians working as possible, and the implementation of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy is one of the measures in place to support this goal. La subvention salariale d'urgence du Canada.
The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy covers up to 75% of employees' salaries. This can be up to $847 per worker per week for up to a maximum of 12 weeks. The subsidy is backdated to March 15th, and businesses will be able to apply as of next Monday, April 27th. The Canada Revenue Agency will administer the wage subsidy program on behalf of the Government of Canada. This program will send funds to thousands of Canadian businesses each week. The Canada Revenue Agency is committed to helping workers and businesses.
Launching a Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy webpage. The page includes a calculator that will help employers to determine quickly the subsidy amount they can expect to claim based on the information that they enter into the calculator. The government is grateful for the input we have received from many stakeholders during our consultations in the last few weeks. These consultations have led to the efficient and quick launch of the website today. J'ai le plaisir d'informer les Canadiens que l'Agence du revenu du Canada.
I am happy to announce to Canadians that today the Canada Revenue Agency is launching a calculator on its website to help employers prepare for their application to the wage subsidy, which will help their employees. We thank business representatives and all stakeholders who have helped in preparing this webpage.
Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy as of April 27th. It is expected that 90% of the applications will have been processed by the 5th of May, with direct deposits and checks made and sent soon after. Until then, businesses are invited to update their business account on the Canada Revenue Agency's website. A technical debriefing session will also be offered this afternoon to the media. À partir du lundi 27 avril, les entreprises...
Businesses will be able to file their applications for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy as of April 27th. We expect that 90% of applications will have been processed by May 5th, and this will quickly be followed by direct deposits and checks being sent out. Until then, businesses are invited to update their profiles on the Canada Revenue Agency website. This afternoon, there will be a technical briefing for media. Our government is committed to continue to support businesses and workers who are facing unprecedented challenges in the context of the pandemic. Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Yves. And now we are ready to take questions.
We'll start with 3 questions on the phone avant de prendre les questions dans la salle. 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Notre première question vient de Louis Samuel.
Our first question is from Louis Samuel Parent from La Presse. Question. So there will be a technical briefing. There are currently sound difficulties.
Our next question is from Jamie Strachan from CBC. Please go ahead.
Hi, my question is for Dr. Tam. Dr. Tam, your counterpart in the U.S., Dr. Fauci, talked last week about a road back for professional sports, games played without any fans in the stands. I'm just wondering, do you think a similar thing could happen in Canada? And can I just get your thoughts on potential return of professional sports in Canada?
So right now, together with all the chief medical officers of health, we are looking at the next phase, if you like. Again, stressing extreme caution in how we have to keep going right now with the measures that we have. We know that population immunity is not going to be high, so that we have to move extremely carefully. I think we will be looking at all different kinds of community settings or activities and providing I think that it has to be a sort of risk-based approach, a risk assessment, and that will include this area. But I think as some of these innovative thinking is coming together, these are some of the ideas. But again, that 2-meter distance and ensuring that we don't spread the illness is extremely important, whichever solution people are going to think of. So absolutely, I think every sector should begin some thinking about how innovative they can be in maintaining that social distance, because we don't have other specific measures to treat or this virus or the vaccine. So any the new normal must take into account of stopping the spread of the virus like we have now. So, I think it's the other perspective I have is just engaging the communities and the sectors that are looking at their own specific situations, because public health can't possibly assess every setting. We can provide guidance as to how you maintain safety and the health and of the population and the clients or the people that they serve.
Jamie, follow up.
Just to be more specific, would you be supportive of games being played in Canada before empty stadiums? Would that be safe in your estimation?
Well, I think together with the other chief medical officers, we have to look at what plans there are with the people who are actually going to be potentially in contact with each other. So I think for sure, crowded conditions, mass gatherings is not in any of our near future. I think that is sort of pretty evident. As to whether certain activity can be done safely, that needs further assessment.
Thank you, Doctor. Operator, next question, please.
Our next question, notre prochaine question d'Hélène Buzetti.
Next question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir.
For you last Thursday, your predictions were that we would have between 1,200 and 1,600 deaths by today, and in fact we're at 1,700. That's the second time your short-term predictions are off. So my question is, should we still trust them? And more specifically, when you're looking at Quebec, where there are now 54% of all Canadian deaths, are you concerned about the situation? And is there something Quebec is doing wrong that would explain the situation?
So, as we've always said, the modeling is for planning purposes. They're not there to accurately tell you what the numbers are every single day. And every single day that we relook at those projections, they will change depending on the actual cases being reported. So whatever I said several days ago, the 24 hours following that, those projections will already have changed. So I think that's some of the difficulties if you're trying to communicate where we're at. But it is within a similar range of severity, and I think it is a reflection of the population that's most impacted right now in many areas of the country, and those are the seniors and those who are in long-term care homes. So absolutely, this is a reflection, I think, of the actual epidemiology of this illness in Canada. So I think every jurisdiction must do their utmost to enhance infection prevention control in all of those settings. So that's absolutely critical. And I think any model is going to tell you that that is, what we're doing right now is going to change the trajectory. Those models are very sensitive to what we do today in terms of projecting into the short or further down the road. So, I think everything must be done to change the course, and it is up to everyone who's responding to help do that.
Well, as a follow-up, you haven't really specifically addressed the question of Quebec now that the province, which represents roughly 23% of the population, has 54% of all deaths. How do you explain that? And should we start to think that maybe Quebec is not doing something right?
I think we do know that many of the cases are linked to long-term care facilities. So I think my answer stays the same. It's not the only jurisdiction. In fact, many provinces have outbreaks related to long-term care facilities, but it is a major challenge in the context of Quebec. And I know that from a public health perspective, they are, escalating and trying to manage that situation.
Thank you, Dr. Operator. One last question on the phone before we turn to the room.
Thank you. Notre prochaine question est de Mélanie Marquis.
Next question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. Question. Thank you. My first question is for Minister Duclos. Minister Duclos, how will you be calculating the emergency wage subsidy payments for thousands of businesses in the country, and how will you do it quickly? Answer, Minister Duclos, thank you for this question. You are very right that these calculations will be rather complex, and it is urgent. We want to help businesses to maintain their employees and rehire them, and as quickly as possible. What we're announcing today is a new calculator being launched on the CRA website, as well as a whole host of information on the CRA webpage so that employers and businesses will be ready to apply as of April 27th. Now, I've had a look at this website myself. I think it's very complete. I think it's very informative. I think it will help businesses prepare to file their applications on April 27th, and it will also help businesses make decisions regarding rehiring their employees if they haven't already made these decisions. The Canada Revenue Agency has extraordinary employees. I'm confident that the CRA will be able to get the payments out quickly. As of May 5th, they will be able to pay out the subsidies that have been applied for. Follow-up question.
Or Dr. Arnoux, it's about the mask wearing policy or instructions. Quebec is working on a scenario right now, or on a new scenario for as far as masks go. I wonder if you're involved in these discussions, and if you would make masks mandatory, as they have been declared mandatory for air travel.
So I think I work with all the chief medical officers of health, so any recommendations goes towards that table, the special advisory committee, and it forms a guidance or baseline upon which different jurisdictions will make certain recommendations. For sure, I think having facial covering or non-medical mask if you're not in the healthcare setting, because we've always said, you need to preserve actual personal protective equipment for that circumstance. And masks do not replace all the other important measures that we do know work in terms of physical distancing, hand washing, hygienic measures. But it does form another layer of protection, which is can be applied when you can't maintain that 2-meter distance. So that is, depending on what setting you're talking about, that is definitely something that can be considered. In the transportation, like on a plane, as one can imagine, that social distancing would be quite challenging, which is why that policy was added. As well, in our Quarantine Act, when we now have mandatory orders for both symptomatic and asymptomatic travelers for isolation or quarantining, quarantine for the 14 days, we also now provide a requirement for the wearing of a mask as people are transferring to their place of quarantine as well.
Thank you, Doctor.
C'est Dr. New. Peut-être je peux répéter la même chose en français. Dr. Tam et moi, on travaille étroitement avec...
I would like to repeat the answer in French. Dr. Tam and I are working very closely with our counterparts, the chief medical officers of the provinces and territories. Together, we sit on a special advisory committee. Yesterday, Dr. Arruda, the Chief Medical Officer of Quebec, said something that is in line with what Dr. Tam and I have been saying. Wearing a non-medical mask can protect others, but it does not replace proven public health measures such as practicing physical distancing, practicing hand hygiene, and all other hygiene measures. However, in some settings, it is not possible to physical distance. For example, when taking public transit or when grocery shopping. So those are situations in which we can wear a non-medical mask. We must make sure to preserve masks for those who work on the front lines in our healthcare system. And now, questions in the...
Question could be mostly for the health minister, but perhaps Minister Freeland or Dr. Tam could also weigh in. So Kristen Beaton was one of the victims in the Nova Scotia shooting. She was also a frontline healthcare worker providing continuing care. Her husband told CTV News this morning that before this tragedy struck their family, they were already living under quite a great deal of stress. She was coming home and very terrified that she would pass on something to her children and her family because she was reusing protective equipment because there was a shortage in Nova Scotia, there was not enough for her and her colleagues. What do you say to the Beaton family and to other frontline healthcare workers when you hear stories like that, that there's not enough PPE to go around?
Well, I'll start. And first of all, obviously, my heart is with Mr. Beaton in this terrible time of loss. I can't even imagine how hard it is and how difficult it is for him as he loses his wife and his soon-to-be child, I understand. And so on the issue of personal protective equipment, I will tell you that the federal government has been supporting provinces and territories to procure equipment, as you know, over the course of the outbreak and pandemic. We've managed to work very well with provinces and territories to fulfill their requests for support around personal protective equipment and other medical devices. It, as you have heard us say many times, has been a very challenging thing to do in the time of a global pandemic where supply chains are disrupted, where all countries are scrambling to try and boost up their capacity to produce PPE, including Canada. I will also say that I know that the provinces have been working very diligently to try and ensure that they're distributing PPE to the hospitals and care facilities. And I will say to Mr. Beaton that we all have to redouble our efforts so that there aren't stories of people that have to reuse masks. There are a number of creative ideas that have come forward from partners around, for example, the sterilization of masks, and we have now approved companies here in Canada that can do that, and there will undoubtedly be even more domestic production and capacity. But I think what it reminds all of us who are the ones trying to facilitate this national response is that we can leave no stone unturned, not at the local level, not at the provincial level, and certainly not at the federal level.
Can do a follow? Is that okay? All right. Is there anything more that can be done in terms of providing greater supplies of protective equipment? Also, I'm thinking about the federal government's potential role in testing, as some provinces, namely Ontario, are having a difficult time meeting up some of the goals they put out for testing and the importance that'll come into play. So for PPE and testing, the federal role.
Well, we all have our eye on testing. It will definitely be part of the strategy that Teresa's Dr. Tam is working with with her colleagues on the next steps in terms of as we emerge from this first wave of illness. Certainly at the federal level, we have tools that we can support the provinces and territories with, and we have been, and namely that's financial resources, that's product, and in this case in testing, it's approval of new testing capacities, for example, and or the equipment that goes along to support that testing. For example, reagent and the chemicals that produce reagent and the domestic ability to manufacture that reagent, and also guidance, how we use those tests in the most efficient way. And in fact, Dr. Tam works on that guidance with her counterparts, and it is constantly under review and being renewed as we both ramp up our capacity and understand better how to really get a good sense of what's happening in the country. I will say again, and it's a similar answer, we can all do better. We can all do more. I know that various provinces and territories have struggled with their capacity to test, and we are always there to support them, whether it's people, whether it's financial resources or equipment. We'll continue to work with the provinces and territories to understand what the particular barriers are in their case in terms of their limitations, and work to provide solutions to alleviate those limitations. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. Julie?
Julie Van Dusen, CBC. I think it's for Dr. Tam. The U.S. estimates it will need about 300,000 people to do contact tracing, especially as it wants to reopen its economy and trace infections. How many will Canada need, and how is that training going so far?
So contact tracing is pretty much a everyday job for local and provincial public health authorities as well. So they are thinking this through. This is one area that really stress that we need to make sure there's enough capacity to do contact tracing. So, and we have offered our support. There's a number of volunteers and people who signed up to our portal in terms of people who can help. So provinces can draw on those rosters in terms of support for contact tracing. But the numbers are up to individual, even health authorities at the local level, to figure out how much they need and to let us know if they need anything else. But I know that the whole public health system knows that contact tracing is going to be very important as we look towards that next phase.
I'll just add that it is extremely important that we understand the investments that we make in public health, both from a prevention perspective and a public health perspective, are critical to the next steps of whether you call it reopening the economy or moving forward in terms of recovering from the pandemic, that if we don't have local public health capacity, we will be significantly hindered in our abilities. And so we regularly have that conversation with provinces and territories at the health minister's conversation table. It is very important that we continue to redouble our efforts to support public health. And I think Dr. Tam is completely accurate when she says that public health is local, that this is something that happens at the municipal level, that is often funded provincially, but facilitated at the local level in partnership with municipalities.
And in a sign that contact tracing is something we're all focused on, I'll just add one thing, which is I had a good conversation with Premier Ford this morning. We talked about the significant progress that Ontario has made in testing and the big difference that that is making. And we also talked about contact tracing and how essential, as your question underscores, Julie, how essential contact tracing is today and also going forward. And we talked about being very good at communicating with each other and being sure that if there is anything that Ontario needs in terms of support on contact tracing, we will all be ready to provide it.
Okay, great. The next question is about the meatpacking plants. So I'm not sure if it's for Patty Hydu, or I'm not sure. So we know the union sounded the alarm a week ago when there were 38 cases at the Cargill plant. Now there's 484. So somebody dropped the ball. Who's going to make sure these places are safe to work in? And who can tell us if the meat packed in these COVID-filled plants is safe to eat?
Well, thanks, Julie. I'll start with an overview, and then I'm going to turn to Dr. Tam because she's been actively involved on the meat packing plant outbreak and other outbreaks and other food facilities. First of all, it's critically important that every sector realize, and sort of back to earlier comments, that every sector realize that they are going to have to be extremely thoughtful about the measures that they take and put into place to protect their employees, because it's not just a matter of a nice thing to do, it's an actual essential component to ensuring that their industry remains strong and able to continue to provide the services or the goods that they provide. We obviously support industry as well as public sectors and in responses, and Public Health Agency of Canada is and has been working on guidance for a variety of different essential workers, and we're very concerned about outbreaks in the food supply chain. Obviously, this has a critical importance not just to the industry, but to the many Canadians along that chain, but also the Canadians that ultimately end up being consumers of the products that farmers are producing. So we have our eye on this very closely right now, and I will turn to Dr. Tam to talk about the details about that particular plant.
I think the outbreak investigation is very much in the jurisdiction of the province of Alberta, and I know that my counterpart is working very hard with the local health authorities. So I think that we're always there to support if they need any extra, support, in whether it's epidemiologists or others, but they are managing the investigation of this outbreak. And what I will point out is that it's not just the workplace, but also of course, the social environment of the workers, making sure that they have the support that they need to keep themselves safe and reduce transmission in their home settings, as well as the work settings. I think the details of exactly what happened in terms of the transmission, I think the Alberta Chief medical officer will have a much greater detail, but I know that the risk is not just in the plant itself, but it's more sort of perhaps in the families and the households and those contexts. So I think that's sort of really important to clarify. But I think all essential workplaces must have the necessary protocols, administrative protocols, physical and environmental adjustments, and as needed, whether it may be masks or personal protective equipment or others that the workers might need, should they not be able to physical distance or observe some of the other public health measures. So I think those are some of the key aspects. Of course, we provide the guidance, but I think the implementation is never as easy as one sort of have on a piece of paper.
Okay, we're going to pull away from this federal briefing with cabinet ministers and federal public health officials. If you want to continue watching, you can go to our website, CBC.ca. I'll bring in my colleague, David Cochran, just to help us wrap that up. I will say that I take little glimmers of optimism where I can get them. And Dr. Tam did say that we have, quote, prevented an explosive outbreak in Canada, as we've seen in other parts of the world. So as we get to maybe the second phase of this, whatever that might bring, that is some encouraging news that measures we are doing work. But over to you on what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think we're getting more and more clarity, Rosie, on the questions that were asked yesterday by Andrew Scheer, the Conservative leader, about planes coming back from China empty. And I've gotten a statement from Anita Anand's office, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, on exactly what happened. And 2 planes did come back from Shanghai without their load of PPE gear that they were sent there to get. One was a federal government run, and another was a undisclosed provincial government run. We don't yet know which provincial government this was. And apparently what has happened is they were caught up in congestion on the ground. The planes were able to get in, but the trucks carrying the supplies couldn't get from the warehouse to the tarmac to load things on in the landing and takeoff window that was given to these Canadian planes. Now, I should also point out that 4 planes did arrive over the weekend carrying full loads of PPE, so it's not like there were no supplies delivered to the country, but this is an ongoing problem at this airport, because essentially every country in the world is looking for the same thing coming out of the same country in a lot of ways, a lot of it relying on the same airport. So I had heard from one official that there was backlogs of trucks trying to get into the airport that were more than 20 hours long. So just on the ground gridlock is causing the problem there.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it, and thanks for all your coverage. You can check out Vashi's show at 5 Eastern. I'm Rosemary Barton, though. Andrew Nichols will pick up our coverage after this. Thank you for watching.